Okay, so in this video we're going to have a quick look over the policy part of the gateway. This is obviously probably the most important part. We're going to have a look at how the rules are processed, the different terminology. We're going to look at some of the default filters already in place and understand how they work, because they'll provide a good benchmark or template for creating some more advanced rules, which we will do in another video. So when you log into the gateway, the policy tab here in rule sets is where all the magic happens. And there's some concepts we need to understand. To start with, when you request a page or download or streaming, effectively the way Web Gateway works is it starts for the top rule and it processes down the rule sets until it gets to the bottom, and if it hasn't been blocked, then effectively it will serve the page. Going through these different rule sets, we can have a number of different actions happen. For instance, we could just block the page entirely. We could request what we call coaching, which is a kind of warning screen and the user has to put continuation through. We could just do things such as logging. In the event log that we have certain persons have gone to certain types of sites. One of the great things about Mcafee Gateway is it's got an incredibly detailed and advanced kind of macro language that allows you to get very in-depth into writing rules around specific headers or strings or contents of pages. And that is actually used by Mcafee to filter out some kind of threats. So sometimes when a flaw is found, say in Internet Explorer, where it might execute code that it's not supposed to, obviously the most important thing is to patch that, but while those patches are being produced, you can use things like Mcafee Gateway to inspect the HTTP headers and look for that vulnerability and block based on that kind of vulnerability. And we'll look into this a little bit later, but you can download these kind of complex rule sets because not all of us have the technical skills to be able to write them ourselves. Okay, so as I said, the page starts at the top, and these are called rule sets. And within the rule sets, you can have sub-rule sets. So if we look at common rules, we can see we have additional rule sets within those. Now, out of the box, Mcafee kind of gives you a simplistic view. So we go to URL filtering. This is a nice simplistic view because it's very simple. You know, do we want to edit the white listing, the block listing, the category lists? Unfortunately, while this is useful when you're starting out, it can become quite frustrating once you become a little bit more advanced. And Mcafee gives you the ability to kind of unlock the view and take full control. Now, one of the big problems I had when I started out with this is I found very little documentation or videos on how all of this sits together. And that's one of the reasons why I've put these videos together to help other people. I would strongly recommend that we start off by going straight into the advanced views, because it doesn't take long to understand the kind of advanced views, and going forward it will give you much greater control and ability to kind of understand what's going on. So if we take, for instance, the global whitelist here, this is nice and simple. Allow URL hosts and allow client IPs. But if we want to really understand, and we should always understand what's happening, we need to unlock the view. And we click unlock here, and it takes us into this kind of view, which gives us a lot greater understanding of what's going on. Now, like I said, each of these are called a rule set. So this is like the top level rule set. And then within a rule set, you have individual rules. So we're going to take global whitelist as an example here. Firstly, we can see that it's enabled. And then this applies to what they call the cycles. There's kind of two parts that make up to getting a web page. Firstly, the request. So when you type something into the URL www.bbc.co.uk, or even when you type something into Google and hit search, you're making a request. And that's kind of like an HTTP request string that gets sent up to the browser. Now, Mcafee calls this the request here, and it can apply rules on the request. So for instance, if you are blocking, say, the BBC, it doesn't need to wait for the BBC to start returning data back to the gateway to block it. It will look at what you're requesting. You're requesting www.bbc.co.uk, and it will see that bbc.co.uk has been blocked, and so it will just block that request from going out. Responses are the other way. So, for instance, if you're scanning for a virus, you can't scan for a virus on someone going to www.bbc.co.uk because it doesn't know what the content is that's coming back. So virus scanning, for instance, would happen as part of a response. So as the data is responding from the server and coming back down to the client PC, then rules that have got the response box ticked will be applied to that data. So this is going to be stuff based on kind of heuristic scanning, so antivirus or attachment types, etc., stuff like that. And the final type is embedded objects. So embedded objects are things that are embedded into the website, such as streaming and downloading videos and documents. Things are outside the standard HTTP. So if we were doing antivirus type checking of downloads, then we would kind of click the embedded objects. So we can see that the global whitelist applies to both, applies to everything effectively, but you'll see there'll be some things that don't. So for instance, we're going to go down to URL filtering, which is further down the list. And again, we unlock this to get the more detailed view. We can see that a lot of the URL filtering is just based on requests. So if we click down on media type filtering, we can see that there is sub rule sets. And the breaking down of rule sets becomes more apparent when we look at the kind of actions that can happen on individual rules. So we've got a top level rule set here, which we can see is applying to requests, responses, and embedded objects. Underneath that, we have another rule set called upload media type. Well, that makes sense. If it's uploading, we're sending up, that's going to be in the request part of a URL. So we can see this only applies to requests and embedded objects. If we look at downloading, which is another kind of rule set, we can see that makes sense. It applies to responses and embedded objects. Now you might say, well, why don't we just tick all three boxes, and that way, we don't have to worry about whether it's a response or request. The idea is that there's a compromise with everything, and the compromise with having in-depth and high quality control over web filtering is that it slows the process down. It has to process those requests. So we need to try and make it as effective as possible. So we only want to process requests if we absolutely need to. And we'll also look at this when we look at the way that we order these rules here. And we order them to try and make it as efficient as possible. So the more rules you put in, the slower the connection, or adversely, the more power you need on your server. See, the more power, the more money it costs. So going back to what we was talking about in terms of rule sets, here, coming down this list, it would hit this rule set, and then it would go into this rule set, which only has one rule. And then if we look here, we've got multiple rules within this rule set. Now, if we look at an individual rule by clicking edit, we can see it's made up of 5 components. Firstly, the name, then the criteria, and this is the criteria whether this rule is going to be actioned. Now, a lot of these built-in types, you don't need to really worry about the in-depth kind of, I call it macro language, but it's useful just to have a look at it. It's basically saying here that if the media type is of at least one in a block list, we'll talk about lists in a minute, then we need to block it. And in the events that we will increment the counter of blocked media type. So effectively what it's saying here is anything in this list, and we'll talk about lists in a second, we will block. And if we block it, no further rules will be carried out. So this is important to understand. As we start at the top and we move our way through a rule set, sub-rule set, and then individual rules, at any point a page can be blocked. And once the page is blocked, it will not continue to process any further down. Now, I understand this is quite a lot to take in. In addition
to criteria on individual rules, we can also base criteria on the rule set itself, and subsequently hierarchical rule sets as well. So here there is no actual rules that are being carried out. It's only rule sets. But there is, if we edit here, the potential to put criteria in here. So we could stop even processing these individual rule sets here by adding criteria such as, if you belong to a certain group, then don't process these rule sets. And in some later examples, we will show how this is quite useful for doing things like if you're an IT department and you need to be able to review sites that are blocked, but you need to decide whether you're going to release them, then we can create rule sets to kind of deal with that. So I've spoken a lot. I think it's probably a good idea if we just go through some of these rules and I just tell you what they are, and you can start to kind of build up a picture of how it works. And then we're going to go in and start creating some rules of our own. So let's start at the top. A web page comes in, hits the global whitelist. That's the first rule. This is going to apply to everything: requests, responses, embedded objects. It applies to every kind of website that comes in. There's no special filtering on here. So it's going to come down to the individual rules. The first rule is if the IP address of the client, so this is going to be a request, is in the allowed client list, then stop cycle. And this is now a convenient point to talk about actions. If we look at the actions of any kind of individual rule, we can see there are a number of actions that can happen. Continue is obvious, it just continues on to the next rule. Blocked is also fairly obvious. When you hit block, that's it, no further processing happens and the page has been blocked. Redirect. So redirect is used for a function called coaching, which we will look at later. So you go to a certain page and you want to make sure that the user is only using this for work purposes. So you want them to tick a box to confirm, yes, I am streaming iPlayer, but I need it for work. So you'd redirect them to a page for coaching. Authenticate. This is, if you get to this point, then you need to make sure that the person is authenticated. We're going to set this up very soon. This is so that we can apply rules based on whether users belong to certain groups, and also is needed so that we can log the activity of individual users. Now, this is the most important two rules, and it's very important to understand the difference between these rules because they have a significant effect. Stop rule set means no longer process anything in the current rule set you're in. Stop cycle means stop any further processing and just allow the page to be displayed. Now, the stop cycle is quite dangerous. If you, say for instance, applied stop cycle on a list of allowed websites, www.bbc.co.uk, stop cycle, what that means is it will stop any further rules being processed, including the ones further down that do things like antivirus and malware. Now, we may want to allow people to go to the BBC website, that's fine, but we do still want to scan it for antivirus and malware. In that case, you don't want to be using the stop cycle. You want to be stopping the rule set. So you would put all your filtering rules into one rule set, as we have here. And as you can see here, we would have rule sets, stop the rule set. So this means that when we hit stop the rule set, we will not process anything further down on this list. We will go back and we will continue to process down this list. And it's really important to understand that, and that is one of the big reasons why we have these rule sets, so that we can look at different types of threats, from antivirus to SSL to just wanting to stop users from hogging all the bandwidth. And we will
create rules and whitelists based specifically on those particular kind of threats. So there may be certain things that we don't want to scan for antivirus. For instance, Microsoft updates can cause problems if you scan for antivirus. So in that instance, we want to have a whitelist, which we have down here, for downloading particular types of files. So why is this called the global whitelist? It's at the very top. And this is the most powerful whitelist going, and this basically means stop cycle, means if your client IP address is in this client allow list, stop cycle, continue working, no problems. Likewise, if you're in a URL host match list, this will be more of a response. If URL host matches, global whitelist, action, stop cycle. Again, very powerful. So what are these normally used for? I would generally use these for looking into problems. So if you've got a website that's not rendering properly, or a website that's coming up with a weird error message, and you're not sure whether it's the gateway that's making changes or blocking or giving you grief, or whether it's a problem with the website, what I generally would do is come up here, very temporarily put the IP address in of the person who is trying to access the website, and see whether that web page is now resolved. And if it is, we can use some troubleshooting techniques, which I will show you later, to find out exactly what is causing the problem. So very rarely would I put anything in the client allow list for long periods of time. Often in the global whitelist, if you're using products such as WebEx, GoToMeeting, things that are using HTTP but not necessarily websites, you can sometimes get issues because they're either getting blocked or they require authentication, which doesn't work properly because they're not really designed to be going through a proxy server. This is where I'd put those kind of things in the global whitelist. Also, coming from an accountancy background, you often have applications that are connecting over web services, such as to Inland Revenue or payroll to HMRC. Those again don't always allow you to put in credentials to pass to the proxy server. So in that case, I would also put them in the whitelist. So at least those kind of services are not going to get blocked at all. And we can again use the troubleshooting to see the kind of issues when they get blocked and how we can identify that. So coming down to common rules. Okay, on each of these, I'm just going to hit unlock so we can get to see the full details of what's going on here. Okay, so the word connect, for some reason in Mcafee Gateway, is basically talking about SSL and secure. And what this rule here does, basically stops SSL pages going out on anything other than port 443. So if it's SSL, or it's reading it as SSL encrypted, unless it's going on 443, it will get blocked. And this is kind of working back to front. What it's actually saying is, if it is on 443, then stop the rule set. But if it's on anything else, because it's not on 443, then actually it's going to come through down to here and it's going to get blocked. So this here allows you to put special URLs in to whitelist cycle responses. And like if you've got security servers, again, this is using the stop cycle. So this is very high level. This means that nothing else will get processed. Web caching. As you can see here, this is a rule set that has no rules. We can have a quick look in here. It applies to all requests and responses. And that's because it would be both requests and responses, because it's both writing to the cache from when you get a web page back and reading from the cache when you request. So here we can see why is this split into two different groups. Well, that's on request, and we can skip caching of the website if you're in this list. We can see that because it stops the rule set. If it stops the rule set, then it's not going to carry out this action here. Sorry. So the criteria is nothing. The action is to continue, but the event is to enable cache. writing, there's a few more rules here. We can see, well, if it's in the bypass list, stop rule set, so nothing else continues. But in addition, there is, if it's over a certain size, and we want to see that size, we can come into the rule. I'll let you work out the bytes to megabytes. Here we can also look if it's a certain type of media, a media type, such as an exe, don't cache it. And if none of those are met, then we will come down to the event of enabling the cache. So now we come to kind of like the core part of the filtering software. And this is to do URL filtering based on websites and categories. And this is now where we're going to move on to in a moment to get into a bit more detail, because this is more where your day-to-day stuff will happen. So when we hit, the web page has come through all of this, it's come through, it's not HTTPS on weird ports, it's written to cache, we're not downloading, we've not globally whitelisted it, we're going to hit URL filtering. This applies to everything, there's no special rules to discriminate what comes through URL filtering. The first rule it's going to hit is to find out whether it's on a URL whitelist. Now, why this is different to the global whitelist, as I said before, is if it is on this whitelist, it's just going to stop the rule set. It's just this that's going to get bypassed. It's going to continue to go down and look at the anti-malware. Here, if it's on a blocked list, then obviously it's just going to hit block straight away. Enable Safe Search Enforcer. What this does is it effectively overwrites the options you have in Google to turn on safe filtering. So if you turn this on, it will kind of force Google to use safe filtering in its responses. So now we're coming down to the categorization of websites. What we're saying here is if the website is not categorized, and we look at this in a little bit more detail, we can see the macro. So basically it's saying, for this URL, if it's in the list of categories is empty equals true, then like just allow it. Because it's not categorized, we don't know what to do. Let's just allow it straight through. But that's only allowing it through to the next rules, which will then start looking at the antivirus and malware. Then we come down to here, and it's basically saying that if the URL is in the block list, which there's some predefined ones already, then block the page. And finally, Mcafee, I'll show you a bit later, has this thing called reputation. So it looks at things like the area or the global geolocation of the IP address of the server, and whether there's been known to viruses to come from that IP address, and can block it on bad reputation. So this is kind of useful for things like URLs that are in spam emails that might be going off to a server where it could be downloading viruses, but those kind of domains for the emails are changing regularly. So instead of Mcafee having to keep updating its category list, it's kind of more blocking it on the reputation of the IP address. Just come down to anti-malware. So we can see if we are on an agent whitelist, so we can stop individual computers from having any malware checking. We can then whitelist individual hosts from going through malware and antivirus checking. This is an example of what I was talking about earlier, how Mcafee can be used to look for flaws or security loopholes in, say, browsers. So this particular rule here, it looks for a website and it will remove the range or remove all header, which was used a while ago to execute arbitrary code on people's machines. So it's kind of just like a safety feature. Here what we're saying is, well, if it's streaming data, we can't really virus scan or malware streaming data because it's having to come through in real time. So in this instance, if it is streaming data, stop any further scanning. So basically, if the virus is found, so it's going to do the scanning. So the action here is setting scanning found, block. That's basically if malware equals infected equals true. And finally, this is dynamic content classification, which basically is, again, like allows you to block and categorize URLs if you were being really strict. Okay, well that concludes this video, and then we'll move on to some more complicated stuff in the next video. Thank you for watching. I'm James Sillett, and I'd like to thank you for taking the time to watch this video. If you have any comments or questions, you can contact me by any of the means shown below.